Welcome to No Compromises, a peek into the mind of two old web devs who have seen some things. This is Joel.
And this is Aaron. I miss when you used to start out these saying, "So Aaron."
So Aaron, learning, we've talked about this on the podcast before, different ways to acquire a skill or to kind of stay current. But I thought today, like an interesting question would be just about like the different styles or methods of learning, if you want to call it that. Like what do you do when you want to learn something, and does it matter? Like if it's I need to learn this because I'm being paid to do this, or I need to learn this because I'm just curious and I want to expand my horizons.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll start. I can talk about how I like to learn. I tend to be more hands on. I find that if I'm reading a book, for example, I really should be. And we're talking about learning technology too.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, this would change depending on the subject matter. But I like to be learning that sitting at the keyboard because I take more of kind of an active role in learning, which is if somebody says something in a book, I don't just be like, that's right. I'm like, really? Or why? Or, like what's behind that? And so sometimes a statement will be made or a code sample will be presented. And I like to actually try it out and experiment. Like, well, what if we didn't put that one thing in there? Would it still work the same way? Or like why is this there? So for me, hands on, like sitting on the couch reading a tech book, it's going to go in one ear and out the other. I kind of have a bad memory to begin with, or like just watching a video course, for hours on end without actually trying to do anything. It's no good for me. I'm not going to come away from that feeling any better about what I know.
Well, I mean, to play a little devil's advocate here, I think you're giving examples of things that aren't how those learners would do it, though. So, like a visual course, someone probably won't watch hours on end. They'll watch half an hour to an hour and then go and do something else. So, there's a difference between saying, like, you just watch it for a long time or you watch it in
Mhm.
small segments. And then as you go and do something else unrelated, it synthesizes in your brain.
Oh, so you're saying like I watch 30 minutes and then I go like vacuum the living room. I'm not like going to sit down at the computer and try to use it. But yeah, I could see that would be maybe a step in between. But I still feel like if I don't actually try to do something with the knowledge, the recently acquired knowledge, it just doesn't stick in my brain. It doesn't like connect to what I already know in a way if I don't do that.
Yeah, I follow what you're saying.
Mhm.
That's why I'm sticking up for the other learners because there's different learner types, right? And
Okay.
that's what you're kind of talking about here. Is for example, I remember we had this conversation when we were writing our validation book. Is I just wanted to write the book, and you wanted to add on the exercises,
I do
and
remember
I
that
was
conversation.
like I don't want to do exercises because it reminded me
Mhm.
of being in school. And so when I was in school, I was I was probably a little bothersome to teachers, but
Mhm.
the way I learn is I'm a listener or like a watcher,
Okay.
and so I would stare at the teachers and just listen. And when they're lecturing stuff, and when they were done, for me there was no amount of exercises that were going to help me because I was like, why are you making me do a contrived sort of thing? I don't like contrived work. It's going to help you remember. I'm like, no. The more you push me to do something I don't want to do, the less I'm
Mhm.
going to remember of the thing I thought I just learned.
So
And
go ahead. Go ahead, 'cause I have a
uh,
follow-up question, but
Yeah. And so, I mean, again, there's all different layers and levels to this stuff. Meaning, like, are you learning something to know about it or to implement it? So
mhm.
there's a
Oh, sure.
difference there because I'll learn about a lot of things to know about it and have enough information to make smart decisions in the future on what I need to look at again.
Mhm.
Versus if there's something I need to learn to implement it, well, then I'm probably learning about it and then applying it right away, but I don't necessarily apply stuff or sit in front of the keyboard and do fake exercises while I'm learning something that I don't need to apply immediately. I'd rather just apply it
Hmm.
immediately.
So, and that makes sense to me. So if you're just learning, like let's take a random example, like the Rust programming language. You have no plans to use it in work, but you're like kind of curious, like people are talking about it, like what's the
Hmm.
big deal? Like that's one level of learning, just like curiosity driven versus like, well, I need to implement some geolocation logic tomorrow and I don't know how to do that the right way. So I really need to learn that right now. Right. Like
Yeah,
that's what you're saying. I would
yeah,
agree with that. The more casual learning, curiosity driven. Yeah, I'm not sitting there like trying to. exercise it and play with it. But so the question I had as you were talking about like the example in school where you're like just staring at the teacher, I'm kind of curious, like what mentally is going on in your mind? Like, are you literally just kind of like passively listening, or are you highlighting in your mind like key points and like somehow tucking that away somewhere, or like is there a process, or I don't know if that's even possible to try to explain how you think about something.
Yeah, so I'm not claiming my way is the better way because I
Hmm.
I don't think it is. I mean,
Okay.
if you look at all the science out there, everyone says the way I do stuff is wrong, which okay, cool. It works for
So you're
me.
objectively
And
wrong, is what you're saying.
yeah, and I'm totally
Okay.
fine with that because it does work for me. I think,
Hmm.
but like when we talk about like taking notes or something too,
Yeah.
like highlighting the things like notes are good, and as I get older, I'm finding them more valuable. But there's a different type of note. There's two different notes. There's one for those main points, like reinforcing those main points, and there's one for remembering details.
Yeah.
And there's kind of a difference between those, subtle but a big difference is, and I will start to forget the main detail if I'm taking notes on the main detail.
Hmm.
But
Yeah. Like,
if I hear something that's like
right.
super weird and very niche, I'll write that down because I'm like, I didn't know that. I can't even remember it as they're saying it. So I better
Hmm.
write it down because I'll never remember it in real time, but at least
Yeah.
I'll have it on my paper.
Yeah, and I've seen that too, like with listening to a lecture or something. If you're trying to like literally record the words they're saying, you're not going to actually hear anything that's happening. Like it's just you're just so busy trying to frantically write everything down or type it or whatever you're doing. But no, and I guess I when I kind of share my approach to learning, I'm not even saying it's the one true way either. But it is curious to me. Like I wonder if some of it has to do with memory, because I joke about it, but I do forget things that
Yeah, I know. I've noticed.
but you know what I'm saying? And so I had a friend, like, he could read a novel and like I read it the year before and he'd be asking me all these details about characters. I'm like, I have no idea. I can't
But
remember
that was
any.
a year ago.
Yeah. That's but that's my point is like some people I feel I don't know if it's the way their brain works or what, but they just can really latch on to something and remember it in more detail than I feel
Mhm.
like I can. So
Yeah.
I guess I'm saying I need more help. That's why I've adopted a particular learning style.
Well, yeah, and I think I'm just going to double back on one thing. I think you have to be careful not to be guilty of looking at other learning styles and looking at their extreme versions. So
Yeah.
again, when you talk about like taking notes on the main point, right away you
Mhm.
went to, well, if you're trying to write down everything that they say, I'm like, that's not what I said.
No.
I said just some notes on the main points.
Right.
I can't even do that because
Mm.
that just distracts me too much.
Yeah.
So I'd rather just pay attention to the thing. Now, again, there's pros and cons to all of this, but you do have something right when you talk about the different types of brains. Not everyone is the same, and that's we can't try to pretend that we are.
No.
So for me, like I said, it's hard to explain what's going on in my mind. I I had a girlfriend once that really challenged me and said, "What are you thinking about?" Which there's a whole set of jokes behind that.
Right.
And I told her nothing, and she just couldn't comprehend I was thinking about nothing. It's
Mhm.
the same sort of thing when you said, "Well, what are you doing with
Right.
your brain?"
Yeah.
I can't. I don't know specifically, except that I'm
Mhm.
extremely there in the moment.
Okay.
So I'm listening, and I don't think I'm doing anything else but listening. And for
Mhm.
my brain, that works. So
Yeah.
I've seen other people that have to write stuff down, and that's their way. They have to write it down, or they'll never remember it.
Yeah.
There's people that can read, there's people that can listen, there's people that have to do hands-on stuff. And I think that's the basic three, right? The hands-on, the listener, and like the reader.
Mhm.
Each one is just a little bit different and has their own set of skill sets. And it just feels impossible to understand the other sets to me.
You're probably right. So one other area that we haven't touched on yet is the idea of like actually getting live help from another person. Coaching.
Mhm.
This is something we've done, for other developers and teams. And it's something I've used in different areas of business and things like that. So, what's your approach to that? Because sometimes, whether it's like a tactical thing, like I'm working in a team and I'm kind of stuck on a problem, or like a larger thing, like I want to get better at this and I'm just not doing it on my own. Like, do you have an approach in mind for when to ask for help and when to like maybe consider coaching or some more hands-on help from somebody?
Yeah, I think when you go down the road of working and learning on something, and no
Mhm.
matter what, like after a while, you can start, if you're really honest with yourself, you can tell when you're not doing it right, or
Right.
like not learning better. Like
Yeah.
when you constantly have to go back to a manual for
Yeah.
something, or like you write everything you write. There's like a level. I think great programmers have a level of like, oh, that could have been better when they
Mhm.
finish it, but they can move on. Whereas another level is, um, I don't know why that's okay. Like I don't know why that's
Right.
working, and
Yep.
you continually don't know why things. I think
Yeah.
that's the time to reach out to the coaching.
Mhm.
But to extend on your question a little bit, like I want to look at it from the opposite side too.
Okay.
One of the things that you need to understand if you're going to ask for coaching then is that you have to then decide and honor and trust that coach, because that's one of the things that I do when I start coaching people is I kind of beat on them with knowledge until they kind of give up and then have trust.
Yeah.
Because if you don't trust your coach, you're not going to learn from them as much, because sometimes things have to happen and you just have to not know why, because you already don't know why,
Mm.
to get you
Mhm.
past that first hump so that the picture is clearer for you.
Yeah. No, I think that's a fair point. I mean, you don't wanna just blindly follow somebody, but the reason you reached out to them as a coach in the first place is you already had some proof that they know what they're talking about. So, once
Yeah.
you're now paying them to help you or whatever the relationship is, like,
Right.
don't be counterproductive and, like, resist it. And one of the other things too, I've experienced this somewhat is, you're coaching somebody and there's an expectation that they're just magically gonna get better. It's like, no, you still have to put in the work. Like you have to do the things I'm telling you to do. In a coaching arrangement, generally you meet periodically with somebody, but then the time in between, they have to do the work. I'm going for physical therapy right now. If I don't do like any work in between those visits, it's going to get better way slower. And
Mhm.
so it's the same approach with coaching. You still have to take ownership for it. You're being led and guided by somebody that's been there before, and so you'll get to the destination faster if you do the work.
So what do you think about peanut butter and banana sandwiches?
It's not currently in my diet, but the flavor combination seems appealing to me. I've probably had one in the past.
Yeah, it's pretty funny to me that if you think about like some things that like just make sense to you or you've kind of grown up with, and other
Mhm.
people have never worked with at all. A
Okay.
buddy of mine, I mentioned he's like, oh, I got some bananas and whatever. I was like, oh, you should make peanut butter and banana sandwich, and he goes, what? And I was like, I thought he was messing with me. So I was like, peanut butter and banana sandwich. He's like, I, and then what? I'm like, what? Eat it? you know? And so he's like, yeah, I never had a peanut butter and banana sandwich. I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, you're gonna have to buy that on the way
Yeah.
home, and so
Go
I guess
fill
he
that
did.
void in your life.
Yeah, I guess he did. And it was
Okay.
like 3 or 4 days later, it was like 10:15 at night, and I get a text message from him just out of the blue saying, "Man, this was amazing." And I'm like looking
Nice.
at that going, but at that time, I'm like, what is he talking
Oh,
about? Like, what did you send me
yep.
at 10 in the, I'm like, is this to
Did
the
you
wrong
did you send this to
person?
the right person? Yeah.
Yeah. But peanut butter and banana. So I guess that was my good deeds for the
Yeah.
for the week, is to point out on our podcast too that if you haven't ever had a peanut butter and banana sandwich, so that is banana with peanut butter on bread, preferably
Mhm.
toast,
Ooh,
because then the
fancy.
peanut butter kind of like melts a little bit too,
Yeah.
depending on what you have.
Yeah.
You
Can I
should
can I just
definitely,
point something out?
yeah.
Because if you've never heard of this concept, you don't put a whole banana just like the sideways on the sandwich, right?
Oh
You
yeah.
cut it up into like little discs and lay
No,
it on
no,
a
no,
sandwich.
no, no. What?
You put it
Into
in a
little
hot dog
discs?
bun, and it's just like the
No,
whole
no,
banana
no,
in
no,
there.
no, 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 no. You
Oh,
don't
come
cut it
on.
into little discs.
I
You cut
do.
it you cut it in half, and then you
Yeah.
cut it lengthwise, so you can put the 4 pieces straight across. Otherwise, if you put the little discs, you have little spots in between where there's no banana. But if you cut
I
them in
mean,
half, and then you cut them like in lengthwise, then they're all like kind of like lined up like spooned banana.
are you telling me my parents did it wrong?
I saw someone do that once, and I thought they were messing with me. Who
No.
who discs their banana?
Well, it's an easier cutting operation, especially if your banana is super curvy, to like evenly get that. But I I can't argue with the geometry of your solution. It's certainly there's more surface area of banana if you do it your way.
Everyone has to do it from time to time, and so do we. We have to ask you to share our podcast.
Go to show.nocompromises.io, and there's probably a link you can click there or something to share it.